The sound of iron shackles scraping against the wooden beam echoed through the dimly lit barn as Catherine Foster struggled to free herself, her once vibrant green eyes now dulled with hunger and desperation. It had been 4 days since the Blackwell Gang had left her there to die, punishment for her brother's debts, and with each passing hour, her hope diminished like the fading sunlight through the barn's weathered planks. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving landscape of Wyoming Territory cared little for the suffering of a young woman abandoned to fate. At 22, Catherine had never imagined her life might end this way, chained like an animal, her throat parched beyond words, her stomach no longer even growling with hunger, but instead twisted into a constant, hollow ache. She had stopped crying yesterday when the last of her tears had dried up along with any remaining moisture in her body. Now she simply slumped against the post, the iron cuffs cutting into her wrists, her once clean blue dress covered in dirt and hay. Her honey blonde hair hung in limp tangles around her face as she drifted in and out of consciousness, the line between sleep and wakefulness blurring with each passing hour. Miles away, Owen Taylor urged his stallion forward through the gathering dusk. At 26, he'd spent most of his adult life moving from ranch to ranch, working cattle drives, and occasionally serving as a deputy when towns needed extra guns. He'd been riding for 2 days straight, following rumors of work at the Henderson Ranch near Sweetwater Creek. The first drops of rain began to fall as Owen spotted a dilapidated barn in the distance. Not ideal, but better than spending another night under the open sky with a storm brewing. He guided his horse toward the structure, the animal's hooves squelching in the rapidly muddying ground. "Easy, bandit," he murmured, patting the horse's neck as they approached. "We'll get out of this rain soon enough." As he dismounted and led his horse toward the barn door, Owen noticed something strange, a heavy padlock securing the entrance. Abandoned barns weren't typically locked up tight, especially not out here where property lines blurred across the vast wilderness. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he studied the lock. The rain began to fall harder, water dripping from the brim of his worn hat as he debated his options. Breaking into someone's property wasn't something he made a habit of, but something about this didn't sit right. This barn looked long abandoned, yet someone had gone to great lengths to secure it. A sound from within, faint but unmistakably human, made his decision for him. Owen reached for his saddlebag and removed a small set of tools he'd acquired years ago during a brief stint working alongside a locksmith in Denver. Within minutes, the rusty lock gave way with a satisfying click. The door creaked open and Owen squinted into the darkness, allowing his eyes to adjust. The musty smell of old hay and dust filled his nostrils as he took a cautious step inside, leading Bandit behind him. "Hello," he called out, his deep voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Anyone in here?" The only answer was the steady drumming of rain on the roof and a soft whimpering sound from the far corner. Owen quickly secured Bandit to a post near the entrance and moved deeper into the barn, his hand resting on his revolver. As he approached the source of the sound, the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls revealed a sight that made his blood run cold. A woman little more than a shadow of a person sat slumped against a beam, her wrists shackled above her head, chains securing her to the post. "Dear God," Owen breathed, rushing forward and kneeling beside her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Catherine's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, confusion and fear evident in her gaze. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry, producing only a hoarse whisper. "Water," she managed to rasp, the single word clearly causing her pain. Owen didn't hesitate. He retrieved his canteen and gently held it to her cracked lips, careful to let her take only small sips at first. "Not too fast," he cautioned, his voice gentle. "You'll make yourself sick." As Catherine drank, Owen examined the shackles binding her wrists. They were locked tight, the metal edges crusted with dried blood where they had cut into her skin. "I'm going to get you out of here," he promised, returning to his tools. The lock on the shackles was more complex than the one on the door, but Owen worked methodically, his brow furrowed in concentration. Catherine watched him through half-lidded eyes, still not entirely convinced he was real and not a hallucination brought on by starvation. She had dreamed of rescue so many times over the past days that reality and fantasy had begun to blur together. "Who did this to you?" Owen asked as he worked, trying to keep her conscious. "Blackwell," she whispered, her voice slightly stronger after the water. "My brother owed them money. Couldn't pay, they took me instead." Owen's jaw tightened at the mention of the notorious gang. The Blackwell outfit had been terrorizing this part of the territory for years, robbing stagecoaches and extorting local businesses. That they would leave a woman to die slowly of thirst and hunger spoke volumes about their cruelty. The lock finally gave way with a satisfying click, and Owen gently freed Catherine's wrists, grimacing at the raw wounds encircling them. Without the shackles supporting her, she slumped forward, too weak to hold herself upright. Owen caught her easily, scooping her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her once healthy frame now frighteningly gaunt after days without sustenance. "I've got you," he murmured, cradling her against his chest as he carried her toward the barn entrance. "You're safe now." As they reached the doorway, Owen paused, looking down at the woman in his arms. The rain had stopped, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, bathing them both in golden light. Catherine blinked against the sudden brightness, turning her face into Owen's chest to shield her eyes after days in the dim barn. "It's all right," Owen said softly, stepping fully into the warm glow of sunset. "I'm taking you home." Catherine looked up at him, seeing her rescuer clearly for the first time. His face was weathered from years under the sun, but kind, with steady blue eyes that held her gaze with quiet assurance. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and his light brown hair curled slightly beneath his hat. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Owen simply nodded, carrying her to his horse. "Can you stay upright in the saddle if I support you?" he asked, studying her weakened state with concern. "I think so," Catherine replied, though uncertainty tinged her voice. Carefully, Owen helped her onto Bandit's back, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist to keep her from falling. Catherine leaned back against his solid chest, too weak to do anything else. "There's a town about 5 miles east of here," Owen said as he guided the horse forward. "We'll get you to a doctor, some food, and a proper place to rest." Catherine nodded weakly, the gentle swaying motion of the horse already lulling her toward unconsciousness. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the feeling of safety in this stranger's arms, his steady heartbeat against her back a reassuring rhythm after days of solitary suffering. Owen felt the exact moment she lost consciousness, her body becoming deadweight against him. He tightened his hold, urging Bandit to a faster pace while still being mindful of his fragile cargo. The town of Sweetwater Creek appeared on the horizon just as the last light faded from the sky. It wasn't much a main street with a general store, saloon, small hotel, and a handful of other buildings, but it had what they needed most. A doctor. Owen rode directly to the doctor's residence at the end of the main street, drawing curious stares from the few people still out at this hour. He dismounted carefully, lifting Catherine's unconscious form into his arms once again, before pounding on the doctor's door with his boot. Dr. Martin Harrison opened the door moments later, his gray eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight before him. "Found her chained up in an abandoned barn about 5 miles west," Owen explained before the doctor could ask. "She's been there at least 4 days with no food or water." "Bring her in," Dr. Harrison said immediately, stepping aside to allow Owen to carry Catherine into his examination room. "Put her on the table." Owen gently laid Catherine down on the wooden examination table, reluctant to let go of her even now. Her face was deathly pale in the lamplight, making the smudges of dirt stand out starkly against her skin. "Who is she?" the doctor asked, already moving to examine his patient. "Name's Catherine. That's all I know," Owen replied, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "She mentioned the Blackwell Gang before she passed out, said they took her for her brother's debts. Doctor." Harrison's mouth tightened into a grim line as he checked Catherine's pulse. Those bastards. This isn't the first victim of theirs I've treated. He looked up at Owen. And you are, Owen Taylor, just passing through looking for work at the Henderson place. The doctor nodded, turning his attention back to Catherine. She's severely dehydrated and malnourished, but her pulse is steady. I'll need to clean these wounds on her wrists and ankles to prevent infection. He glanced at Owen. You can wait outside if you prefer. Owen hesitated, strangely reluctant to leave Catherine's side. I'll stay if it's all the same to you, at least until she wakes up. Don't want her frightened if she comes to in a strange place. Dr. Harrison gave him an appraising look but didn't argue. Very well, make yourself useful then. There's a pitcher of clean water on that shelf and some clean cloths in the drawer beneath it. For the next hour, Owen assisted the doctor as he tended to Catherine's injuries. They carefully cleaned the abraded skin around her wrists and ankles, applied a soothing salve, and bandaged the wounds. Dr. Harrison mixed a nutritive broth, which they managed to get Catherine to swallow even in her unconscious state, spooning it carefully between her lips. She needs proper rest now, the doctor said finally, wiping his hands on a towel, and more fluids when she wakes. The Peterson widow runs a boarding house next door. She'll have a room where the girl can recover. Owen nodded, gathering Catherine into his arms once more. The doctor opened the door for him, then led the way to the neighboring building, where a lamp still burned in the front window despite the late hour. Mrs. Peterson, a plump woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and kind eyes, took one look at Catherine's condition and immediately ushered them to a small but clean room on the ground floor. Poor dear, she clucked, turning down the covers of the bed so Owen could lay Catherine down. I'll fetch some clean nightclothes and heat water for a bath when she's strong enough. Thank you, madam, Owen said, gently placing Catherine on the bed. He stood awkwardly for a moment, hat in hand, unsure of his next move now that she was safely delivered to proper care. Will you be needing a room as well, young man? Mrs. Peterson asked, her shrewd eyes taking in his trail-worn appearance. Owen hesitated, thinking of his dwindling funds. He had planned to camp outside town to save money until he secured work at the Henderson Ranch. Doctor Harrison, seeming to sense his dilemma, spoke up. Put it on my account, Adelaide. Mr. Taylor here saved this young woman's life tonight. Owen started to protest, but the doctor cut him off with a raised hand. Consider it payment for your assistance. Besides, she'll rest easier knowing her rescuer is nearby when she wakes. Something in the doctor's tone made Owen wonder if the older man had somehow sensed his reluctance to leave Catherine's side. He nodded gratefully. Much obliged, doctor. After Mrs. Peterson showed Owen to a small room upstairs, he took care of Bandit, making sure his faithful horse was stabled and fed at the livery down the street. By the time he returned to the boarding house, exhaustion had settled deep in his bones. He managed to remove his boots and gun belt before collapsing onto the narrow bed, the events of the day catching up to him all at once. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of Catherine's face in that moment he had carried her from the darkness of the barn into the golden light of sunset, the way her eyes had opened wide with disbelief and hope, as if she were witnessing a miracle. The morning sun streaming through the window woke Catherine, momentarily disorienting her. For a heartbeat, panic seized her as she tried to raise her arms and felt a twinge of pain, but then she realized she was in a soft bed, her wrists bandaged but free of shackles. The nightmare in the barn hadn't been a dream, but neither was her rescue. She struggled to sit up, her body still weak, but no longer consumed by the desperate thirst that had tormented her for days. A glass of water sat on the bedside table, and she reached for it gratefully, drinking slowly as she took in her surroundings. The room was small but neat, with simple furnishings and floral curtains framing the window. A rocking chair sat in one corner, and a small washstand with a basin and pitcher occupied another. The door opened as she was setting the empty glass back on the table, and a motherly woman with gray hair entered carrying a tray. "Ah, you're awake." "That's wonderful," the woman said, her face breaking into a warm smile. "I'm Mrs. Peterson. You're in my boarding house in Sweetwater Creek." "Catherine Foster," she replied, her voice still rough. "How did I get here?" "That handsome cowboy brought you in last night," Mrs. Peterson explained, setting the tray on Catherine's lap. It held a bowl of thin porridge, more water, and a cup of tea. "Dr. Harrison says you need to start with simple foods. Your stomach won't handle much after what you've been through." Catherine nodded, the memory of strong arms carrying her from darkness into light returning with sudden clarity. "The man who rescued me, is he still here, Mr. Taylor?" "Yes, he's upstairs, been checking on you every couple hours since dawn." Mrs. Peterson smiled knowingly. "Seems quite concerned about your welfare." A flush of warmth that had nothing to do with her physical condition spread through Catherine's cheeks. "He saved my life," she said simply, taking a small spoonful of porridge. It was bland but felt like heaven to her empty stomach. "That he did," Mrs. Peterson agreed, "and he's waiting to speak with you when you're feeling up to it. Dr. Harrison will be by to check on you soon as well." After Catherine had managed to eat about half the porridge and drink all the tea, Mrs. Peterson helped her wash her face and brush her tangled hair. The older woman had also provided a clean nightgown, and the simple act of changing out of her filthy dress made Catherine feel almost human again. "There now, you look much better already," Mrs. Peterson said approvingly. "Shall I tell Mr. Taylor you're receiving visitors?" Catherine nodded, suddenly nervous at the prospect of seeing her rescuer again. In the barn, delirious with thirst and hunger, she hadn't fully registered his appearance beyond a general impression of strength and kindness. Now, she wondered what he would think of her in the clear light of day. A few minutes later, a knock sounded at the door and Owen Taylor entered, hat in hand. He was taller than Catherine remembered, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. His face was cleanly shaved this morning, revealing a strong jaw and defined cheekbones. But it was his eyes that caught and held her attention, a clear, steady blue that somehow managed to convey both strength and gentleness. "Miss Foster," he said, his deep voice sending an unexpected shiver through her. "It's good to see you awake." "Mr. Taylor," she replied, suddenly acutely aware of her position in the bed and the thin nightgown covering her. She pulled the blanket a little higher. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." Owen shook his head, moving to sit in the rocking chair beside her bed. "No thanks needed, madam. Any decent person would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Catherine said quietly. "Most people would have moved on, especially seeing that lock. You didn't even know I was in there." A small smile touched his lips. "I heard something. Couldn't just ride away without checking." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, an unspoken connection forming between them, survivor and savior, linked by circumstances neither could have predicted. "The doctor says you need rest," Owen finally said, breaking the silence. "But I was hoping you might tell me more about how you ended up in that barn, if you're feeling up to it, that is." Catherine nodded, her hands twisting in the blanket as she gathered her thoughts. "My brother Thomas and I came west from Pennsylvania after our parents died last year. He had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Dreams that turned to gambling debts when the mining didn't pan out." Owen listened silently as she continued, explaining how Thomas had borrowed money from the Blackwell Gang, promising returns he couldn't deliver. When they came to collect, Thomas was nowhere to be found, having fled in the night without even warning his sister. "They found me alone at our cabin," Catherine said, her voice growing quieter. "Said I'd be collateral until Thomas paid his debts. I think they meant to sell me to one of those houses in Cheyenne eventually, but then they got word of a big shipment coming through that they planned to rob. They couldn't take me with them, and they didn't want to leave me somewhere I might be found and raise the alarm." Her voice faltered as she remembered the moment they had chained her in the barn, laughing as they told her they'd come back for her if they remembered. "I don't think they ever intended to return," she finished simply. Owen's hands had clenched into fists during her story, his knuckles white with suppressed anger. "These men," he said carefully, "would you recognize them again?" Catherine nodded. "There were 4 of them. The leader calls himself Silas Blackwell. The others were named Cord, Jasper, and Pike." "Blackwell," Owen repeated, something flashing in his eyes that Catherine couldn't quite identify. I've heard of him. He and his men have been terrorizing this part of Wyoming for years. Before Catherine could respond, Dr. Harrison arrived to check on his patient. Owen excused himself, promising to return later. "Your young man seems quite concerned about you," the doctor remarked as he examined Catherine's wrists. "He's not my young man," Catherine corrected quickly, though the words sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "We only just met yesterday," Dr. Harrison hummed noncommittally. "Well, he's barely left your side since bringing you in." "These wounds are looking better already," he added, rewrapping her wrists with fresh bandages. "You're young and strong. With proper food and rest, you should recover completely within a week or two." After the doctor left, Catherine found herself drifting back to sleep, her body still demanding rest to heal. Her dreams were a confused jumble of dark barns and shackles, punctuated by moments of golden light and the memory of strong arms carrying her to safety. She woke to find Owen sitting in the rocking chair beside her bed, reading a tattered book by the fading afternoon light. He looked up when she stirred, closing the book and setting it aside. "Mrs. Peterson's bringing some soup for you soon," he said. "Doctor says you can try something a little heartier this evening." Catherine nodded, studying him curiously. "You're still here," she observed. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" A small smile touched Owen's lips. "Nowhere that can't wait." "I was headed to the Henderson Ranch to look for work, but that'll keep for another day or two." "I don't want to delay you," Catherine said, though part of her was selfishly glad for his continued presence. "It's no trouble," Owen assured her. "Besides, I spoke with Sheriff Mills this morning about what happened to you. He's sending telegrams to see if they can track down your brother or get any word on Blackwell's whereabouts." Catherine's heart sank at the mention of Thomas. "I doubt he'll be found if he doesn't want to be," she said softly. "And even if he is, I'm not sure I want to see him again after this." Owen studied her face for a long moment. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Once you're recovered, I mean." It was a question Catherine had been avoiding. Before the Blackwell Gang had taken her, she'd been working as a seamstress in the small mining settlement where Thomas had staked his claim. But there was nothing for her there now, especially with the mine played out and most of the prospectors moving on. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some skill with a needle. Perhaps I can find work in a larger town." Before Owen could respond, Mrs. Peterson arrived with a tray bearing a bowl of fragrant chicken soup and a slice of bread. The conversation turned to lighter topics as Catherine ate, discovering that her appetite was returning with surprising force. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Catherine grew stronger with each passing hour, soon able to sit in a chair by the window and, by the third day, to take short walks around Mrs. Peterson's small garden with Owen's steadying arm to lean on. They talked during these walks and in the quiet evenings when he would sit with her after dinner. Catherine learned that Owen had been born in Texas, the son of a rancher who had lost everything during the war. He'd been on his own since 18, working his way across the Western Territories as a cowhand, occasional deputy, and whatever else would earn an honest dollar. In turn, she told him about her life in Pennsylvania, her father's work as a clockmaker, her mother's garden, and the comfortable home she had left behind after their deaths. She spoke of Thomas too, not just his failings, but the bright, charismatic brother she had idolized as a child before gambling and drink had changed him. "You have a good heart," Owen observed one evening as they sat in Mrs. Peterson's parlor, the older woman having discreetly retired early to give them privacy. "Most people wouldn't speak so kindly of someone who abandoned them to such a fate." Catherine sighed, her fingers tracing the healing marks on her wrists. "He's still my brother. I'm angry with him, furious even, but I can't just stop caring." Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Families complicated that way. On the 5th day after her rescue, Sheriff Mills arrived at the boarding house with news. Catherine and Owen were in the parlor when Mrs. Peterson showed him in, his weathered face grave beneath his gray mustache. "Miss Foster," he said, removing his hat. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you," Catherine replied, straightening in her chair. "Do you have news of my brother?" The sheriff exchanged a glance with Owen before answering. "I'm afraid so, miss. A body matching your brother's description was found near Rawlins 3 days ago. He'd been shot, likely in a dispute over cards." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face, a roaring in her ears nearly drowning out the sheriff's next words. "There was a letter in his pocket," Sheriff Mills continued, producing a folded piece of paper from his vest. "It's addressed to you. Seems he wrote it not long before his death." With trembling fingers, Catherine accepted the letter, recognizing Thomas's untidy scrawl immediately. She didn't open it right away, instead clutching it tightly in her lap as she struggled to process the news. "Thank you for bringing this," she managed to say. The sheriff nodded, then turned to Owen. "There's other news as well. The Blackwell Gang hit the stage from Cheyenne yesterday. 2 passengers killed, including a U.S. Marshal who was riding shotgun. The territorial governor has authorized a special reward for information leading to their capture." Owen's expression hardened. "Any idea where they're headed?" "Word is they're moving north, possibly toward the Montana border," Sheriff Mills replied. "But they've been known to double back when the heat's on." After the sheriff left, Owen moved to Catherine's side, concern evident in his eyes. "I'm sorry about your brother," he said softly. Catherine nodded, still clutching the unopened letter. Would you give me a moment alone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Owen agreed immediately, rising to his feet. "I'll be just outside if you need me." When he had gone, Catherine finally unfolded the letter with shaking hands, bracing herself for whatever Thomas's last words might be. "Dearest Kathy," the letter began, using the childhood nickname he alone had called her. "By the time you read this, I will likely be gone from this world. I write this not to ask forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but to confess my sins against you, the only person who has ever truly believed in me." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as she read on, learning how Thomas had fled not out of pure cowardice, but because Blackwell had offered him a choice: his life or hers. He had intended to gather enough money to pay off the debt and return for her, but his plan had gone awry when he was caught cheating at cards in Rawlins. "I know now I should have stayed and faced my fate," Thomas wrote near the end. "Instead, I left you to face yours alone, a sin for which there can be no absolution. I pray that somehow you escaped the fate I condemned you to, though I know such miracles are rare in this harsh land. If by some chance you are reading this as a free woman, know that my last thoughts were of you, and my last prayer was for your safety." The letter ended with a postscript containing the location of a small cache of money Thomas had hidden near their old cabin. Not much, but enough perhaps to give Catherine a fresh start. By the time she finished reading, tears were streaming freely down Catherine's face. The grief she felt was complicated by anger, relief that Thomas had not simply abandoned her without a thought, and a profound sadness for the waste of a life that had once held such promise. A soft knock at the door preceded Owen's concerned face. Seeing her tears, he crossed the room in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside her chair. "What is it?" he asked gently. "What did he say?" Between sobs, Catherine managed to explain the contents of the letter. Owen listened without interruption, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. "He tried to protect you in his own misguided way," Owen said when she had finished. "It doesn't excuse what he did, but at least you know he cared." Catherine nodded, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief Mrs. Peterson had provided earlier. "There's money," she said, her practical nature asserting itself through the grief. "Not much, but enough to give me options. If I can get to our old cabin near Silver Creek, I can retrieve it." Owen was silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Silver Creek is about 40 miles west of here," he said finally. "Not a journey you should make alone, especially with Blackwell and his men still out there somewhere." "I can hire someone to take me," Catherine began, but Owen shook his head. "I'll take you," he said firmly. "When you're strong enough to travel." Catherine looked up at him in surprise. "But what about your job at the Henderson Ranch? You've already delayed so long because of me." A small smile touched Owen's lips. "As it happens, I spoke with Mr. Henderson yesterday when he was in town." The position's been filled, but he mentioned his sister needs help at her place up north. Said I should stop by when I'm ready. So you'd be heading west anyway? Catherine asked, trying to ignore the flutter of disappointment in her chest at the thought of Owen continuing on his way without her. Not exactly, Owen admitted, but Silver Creek isn't so far out of my way, and I'd rest easier knowing you got there safely. The warmth in his eyes as he spoke made Catherine's heart beat a little faster. She had tried to ignore the growing attraction she felt toward this man who had saved her life, telling herself it was merely gratitude and the natural response to finding safety after terror. But in moments like this, when his gaze held hers with such quiet intensity, she found it increasingly difficult to dismiss her feelings as simple thankfulness. "Thank you," she said softly. "I would appreciate your escort, Doctor." Harrison declared Catherine fit for travel 3 days later, though he cautioned her to take it slowly and not overexert herself. Mrs. Peterson packed a basket of food for their journey, refusing payment from either of them. "You just come back and visit an old woman sometime," she told Catherine as they said their goodbyes. "Both of you," she added with a meaningful glance at Owen that made Catherine blush. They set out at dawn, Catherine riding a gentle mare Owen had purchased with some of his savings, despite her protests that she could ride behind him. The early morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the vast Wyoming landscape stretching out before them in shades of gold and amber. "It's a beautiful country," Catherine observed as they rode side by side, the town of Sweetwater Creek fading behind them. "Harsh, but beautiful." Owen nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with the habitual wariness of a man accustomed to reading the land for signs of danger. "It gets under your skin," he agreed. "I've been all over the territories, but there's something about Wyoming that calls to me." They made good time that first day, stopping frequently to allow Catherine to rest. Owen was attentive to her needs without being overbearing, seeming to sense when she needed assistance and when she preferred to manage on her own. As the sun began to set, they made camp in a small grove of cottonwoods near a creek. Owen efficiently set up a small tent for Catherine, insisting she take the only shelter while he slept under the stars. "I've spent most of my life sleeping outdoors," he said when she protested. "One more night won't hurt me." After a simple meal of Mrs. Peterson's fried chicken and biscuits, they sat beside the campfire, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across their faces. The night was clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above them. "Tell me about your life before all this," Owen said, pouring Catherine a cup of coffee from the pot nestled in the coals. "What were your dreams before you came west?" Catherine accepted the cup, warming her hands around it as she considered the question. "I wanted to open a dress shop," she admitted. "Nothing fancy, just a place where I could create beautiful things." A wistful smile touched her lips. "I used to design gowns for my dolls when I was a girl. My mother taught me to sew, and I discovered I had a gift for it." "Why didn't you?" Owen asked. "Open a shop, I mean," Catherine shrugged, taking a sip of coffee before answering. "Life intervened. My parents fell ill within months of each other. After they were gone, the house had to be sold to pay debts. Thomas convinced me that the West was where we could make our fortunes and start fresh." She gave a soft, humorless laugh. "You know how that turned out." Owen studied her face in the firelight. "It's not too late, you know, for your dress shop." "Perhaps," Catherine acknowledged. "If the money Thomas left is enough for a start, what about you? What dreams are you chasing across these territories?" A thoughtful expression crossed Owen's face as he poked at the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the night air. "Land, I suppose," he said finally. "A place of my own. My father had a small ranch in Texas before the war took it. I always thought I'd have something similar someday." "Why haven't you settled somewhere already?" Catherine asked, genuinely curious about this man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. Owen was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "Never found the right place, I guess," he said finally. "Or maybe I was waiting for something and didn't know what it was." The way he looked at her as he spoke those words sent a warmth through Catherine that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee. For a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them, a current of possibility that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. The spell was broken by the distant howl of a coyote, reminding them both of the wild country surrounding their small camp. Owen cleared his throat, rising to his feet. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice gruffer than before. "We've got another long day tomorrow." Catherine nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. The day's ride had taxed her still recovering strength more than she wanted to admit. She retreated to the small tent, listening to the sounds of Owen moving around the camp, checking on the horses and banking the fire for the night. As she drifted towards sleep, wrapped in the blanket Owen had insisted she take, Catherine found herself thinking about the dress shop she had once dreamed of, and wondering if such dreams could still come true in this harsh but beautiful land. And if they did, she wondered if Owen Taylor might somehow be part of that future. The next day dawned clear and cool, with a hint of frost silvering the grass around their camp. They broke fast with more of Mrs. Peterson's provisions and strong coffee, before striking camp and continuing their journey westward. As they rode, Catherine noticed Owen becoming increasingly vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon and the rocky outcroppings they passed. His hand rested more frequently on the revolver at his hip, and he often rode slightly ahead, as if scouting the path. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked as they stopped to water the horses at a small stream around midday. Owen hesitated before answering, clearly debating how much to share. "We're getting close to Blackwell Territory," he admitted finally. "They've been known to use the canyons west of here as hideouts." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran through Catherine. "Do you think they're out there now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hard to say," Owen replied, his eyes continuing to survey their surroundings. "The sheriff said they were headed north, but like he also mentioned, they've been known to double back." Catherine unconsciously touched the healing marks on her wrists, the memory of her captivity still fresh enough to send a spike of fear through her. Owen noticed the gesture and moved closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be careful," he promised. "And I won't let anything happen to you." The quiet confidence in his voice helped steady Catherine's nerves. This man had already saved her once. She trusted him to keep her safe now. They continued on more cautiously, Owen choosing their path with deliberate care, avoiding the main trails where possible. By late afternoon, the landscape had changed, becoming more rugged as they approached the foothills that would eventually lead to Silver Creek. "We'll camp early tonight," Owen decided as they crested a small rise overlooking a sheltered hollow with a spring bubbling up among some rocks. "This spot gives us good visibility in all directions, and we're sheltered from the wind." As they made camp, Catherine noticed Owen taking extra precautions, positioning their sight so that the rock face was at their backs and setting up her tent in the most protected spot. He also unsaddled both horses, but left them tethered in a way that would allow for quick departure if necessary. "Do you think we're being followed?" Catherine asked directly as they ate a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and the last of Mrs. Peterson's preserves. Owen considered her question before answering, respect for her courage evident in his eyes. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But out here, it's better to be cautious. The tracks I saw back at the creek crossing were fresh 4 horses, heading in the same direction we are." "Blackwell and his men," Catherine said, the names hanging in the air between them. Cord, Jasper, Pike, and Silas himself, the 4 men who had chained her in that barn and left her to die. "Maybe," Owen acknowledged, "or maybe just travelers like us. Either way, I'll keep watch tonight." Despite his reassurances, Catherine found sleep elusive that night. Every sound from the darkness beyond her tent, the rustle of wind through the scrub brush, the distant cry of a night bird, the occasional shifting of the horses made her tense with apprehension. She could hear Owen moving quietly around the camp, his footsteps a reassuring reminder that she wasn't alone. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of being chased through endless canyons by shadowy figures on horseback. She woke at dawn to the smell of coffee and the sound of Owen's voice speaking in low, urgent tones. Sitting up quickly, Catherine pushed aside the tent flap to find him in conversation with a weather-beaten man in buckskins whose lined face and graying hair spoke of decades in the wilderness. "Miss Foster," Owen said, turning as he noticed her emergence. "This is Caleb Jenkins. He's a trapper who works these parts. He has news we should hear." Catherine quickly joined them by the small fire, accepting a cup of coffee from Owen with a grateful nod. "Madam," the trapper acknowledged, dipping his head respectfully, "was just telling your man here that Blackwell and his boys are holed up not 10 miles from here. They hit away station yesterday, killed the station master and 2 passengers." Catherine's hand trembled, sloshing hot coffee over her fingers. She barely noticed the burn, her mind filled with images of the men who had tormented her. "Did they head north afterward?" Owen asked, his expression grim. Jenkins shook his head. "Nope, word is they're planning something big. There's a gold shipment coming through Silver Creek tomorrow, Army payroll for the fort up north." Owen and Catherine exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Silver Creek, their destination, was directly in Blackwell's path. "Is there another way to approach the settlement?" Owen asked. "Without using the main trail," the trapper considered this, stroking his grizzled beard. "There's an old hunting path through the eastern canyon. Adds half a day to the journey but keeps you clear of the main roads where Blackwell's likely to have lookouts." After Jenkins departed with a fresh supply of coffee and jerky in exchange for his information, Owen and Catherine discussed their options. "We could turn back," Owen suggested, though his tone indicated he already knew what her answer would be. Catherine shook her head firmly. "The money Thomas left is my only chance at a fresh start. I need to reach that cabin." Owen studied her face for a long moment, admiration evident in his eyes. "Then we take the eastern canyon," he decided, "and we travel carefully." They broke camp quickly, leaving as little trace of their presence as possible. The path Jenkins had described was indeed more difficult, a narrow track that wound through a labyrinth of rocky canyons, sometimes barely wide enough for their horses to pass single file. The day was tense, both of them alert to every sound, every movement. When they stopped briefly to rest the horses, they spoke in whispers, as if the very rocks might carry their voices to unwanted ears. By late afternoon, they had navigated the worst of the canyon and emerged onto a high plateau that offered views of the valley below. In the distance, Catherine could make out the scattered buildings of Silver Creek, a small settlement that had sprung up around the mine where Thomas had briefly worked. "We can reach it by nightfall if we push on," Owen said, studying the position of the sun. "But we'd be traveling in the open for the last few miles, and in the twilight, we'd be visible to anyone watching the approaches." Catherine considered this, weighing her eagerness to reach their destination against the risk of detection. "What do you suggest?" she asked, trusting his judgment. "We camp here tonight," Owen decided. "Make our approach at first light when we can better see what we're riding into." They made a cold camp that night, foregoing a fire despite the increasing chill in the air. Owen insisted Catherine take both blankets, wrapping one around her shoulders as they sat side by side, watching the distant lights of Silver Creek appear one by one as darkness fell. "Tell me about the cabin," Owen said, his voice low in the gathering darkness. "Where exactly is it?" Catherine described the small structure Thomas had built on the edge of the settlement, near a stand of pines that marked the boundary of what had once been their claim. "The money is hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the stove," she explained. "At least that's what Thomas wrote in his letter." Owen nodded, his shoulder warm against hers as they sat close together for warmth. "We'll find it," he promised, "and then you can start planning that dress shop." The casual confidence with which he spoke of her future warmed Catherine more than any blanket could. In the days they had traveled together, Owen's quiet strength and unwavering support had become a foundation she found herself increasingly reluctant to leave behind once their journey ended. "What will you do?" she asked softly. After you've delivered me safely to Silver Creek, Owen was silent for a long moment, his profile sharp against the star-filled sky. That depends, he finally said, turning to look at her. On what? Catherine asked, her heart suddenly beating faster at the intensity in his gaze. On whether there might be a reason for me to stay, he replied, his voice deepening with an emotion neither of them had yet dared to name. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Catherine found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force as inevitable as gravity itself. Owen's hand came up to gently touch her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. "Catherine," he began, her name a whisper on his lips. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of gunshots echoing across the valley. They both stiffened, the spell broken as reality intruded with brutal suddenness. Owen was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to his revolver as he stared toward the settlement below. More shots rang out, followed by the faint glow of flames beginning to lick at one of the buildings on the outskirts of town. "Blackwell," Catherine whispered, rising to stand beside Owen, the blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders. Owen nodded grimly. "Looks like they've started early." The gold shipment must have arrived ahead of schedule. They watched in helpless silence as the distant drama unfolded, the flames growing larger, more shots ringing out across the night. After what seemed an eternity, the gunfire ceased, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the scrub brush around them. "What does this mean for us?" Catherine finally asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Owen turned to her, his expression resolute in the starlight. "It means we wait. If Blackwell got what he came for, he and his men will be long gone by morning, if not." He left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. They spent a restless night, taking turns keeping watch. When dawn finally broke, the settlement below appeared peaceful, though a thin column of smoke still rose from the burned building they had seen the night before. "We'll approach carefully," Owen said as they saddled the horses. "If anything seems wrong, we turn back immediately." "Agreed." Catherine nodded, though they both knew she had little choice but to trust his judgment. The money hidden in the cabin represented her only chance at independence, but no amount of money was worth their lives. They descended from the plateau, Owen leading the way along a game trail that offered some cover as they approached the settlement. As they drew closer, they could see people moving about, not the chaos of an ongoing attack, but the somber aftermath of violence. The burned building turned out to be the assay office, reduced now to charred timbers and smoking ruins. Men were already at work clearing debris, while women gathered in small groups, their faces drawn with shock and grief. Owen and Catherine rode slowly into town, drawing curious and suspicious glances from the residents. A man wearing a deputy's badge approached them, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "State your business," he said bluntly, eyeing them with the wariness of someone who had just lived through violence and expected more. "I'm Catherine Foster," Catherine spoke up before Owen could respond. "Thomas Foster's sister. I've come to collect some personal items from our cabin." Recognition flickered in the deputy's eyes. "Foster," he repeated. "Heard he got himself killed over in Rawlins." Catherine nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yes, I'm here to settle his affairs." The deputy's posture relaxed slightly. "Cabin's still standing, far as I know." "Out past the pine grove," he glanced at Owen. "And you are Owen Taylor," he replied simply, "Miss Foster's escort." The deputy studied them both for another moment before apparently deciding they posed no threat. "Towns had a rough night," he said, gesturing toward the burned assay office. "Blackwell and his boys hit us just after sunset. Took the army payroll that was being held overnight, killed 2 men who tried to stop them." "Which way did they head?" Owen asked, his voice carefully neutral. "North, toward the territorial border," the deputy replied. "Army patrols already in pursuit, but Blackwell knows these hills better than any of them. Doubt they'll catch him." Catherine felt a rush of relief. If Blackwell and his men were heading north, away from Silver Creek, the immediate danger to them was past. "Is there somewhere Miss Foster can rest while I check on the condition of the cabin?" Owen asked, noticing the fatigue beginning to show in Catherine's posture despite her attempts to hide it. The deputy directed them to a small hotel on the main street where Catherine could wait comfortably. Owen helped her dismount and saw her settled in the hotel's modest lobby before heading out to locate the cabin and assess its condition. Left alone for the first time in days, Catherine found herself missing Owen's reassuring presence more than she had expected. The lobby of the Silver Creek Hotel was clean but sparse, with a few worn chairs and a desk where a middle-aged woman was sorting through papers. "Would you like some tea, dear?" the woman asked, looking up and noticing Catherine's tired appearance. "You look like you've had a long journey." "Thank you, that would be lovely," Catherine replied with a grateful smile. The tea, when it arrived, was strong and sweet, exactly what Catherine needed to revive her spirits. As she sipped it, she found herself thinking about the money hidden in the cabin and what it might mean for her future. Thomas's letter had mentioned a sum of nearly $500, not a fortune, but enough to start over somewhere, perhaps enough to begin building the dress shop she had always dreamed of. And then there was Owen. In the short time they had known each other, he had become more important to her than she had ever expected. The thought of saying goodbye to him once their business in Silver Creek was concluded filled her with a sense of loss she wasn't prepared for. Owen returned about an hour later, dust on his clothes but a satisfied expression on his face. "The cabin's intact," he reported, taking a seat beside Catherine. "A bit neglected but structurally sound, and I found what we're looking for." He patted his vest pocket meaningfully, and Catherine's eyes widened. "You found the money," Owen nodded, lowering his voice. "Just where Thomas said it would be. I thought it best not to leave it there, given recent events." Relief washed over Catherine, followed quickly by a new uncertainty. With the money secured and the immediate threat of Blackwell behind them, there was no longer any reason for their paths to remain joined. The thought sent an unexpected pang through her heart. "I've arranged for us to stay at the hotel tonight," Owen continued, unaware of her inner turmoil. "The cabin's not in any condition for you to stay there, and we could both use a proper rest after the past few days." Catherine nodded her agreement, trying to focus on practical matters rather than the confusing emotions swirling within her. "What about afterward?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Will you still be heading north to that ranch you mentioned?" Something flickered in Owen's eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a question he wasn't ready to ask. "That depends," he said finally, echoing his words from the previous night. "On whether there might be a reason for you to stay," Catherine completed the thought, her heart pounding as she took the risk of putting into words what had been building between them. Owen held her gaze, the busy hotel lobby fading away until it felt as though they were the only two people in the world. "Yes," he said simply. "Exactly that." Before either of them could say more, a commotion erupted outside, shouts and the sound of horses galloping into town. Owen was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his gun as he moved to the window. "What is it?" Catherine asked, joining him. "Army patrol," Owen replied, relaxing slightly as he recognized the blue uniforms of the cavalrymen entering the town. "Looks like they're returning from pursuing Blackwell." They watched as the soldiers dismounted in front of the sheriff's office across the street. The men looked tired and frustrated, clear indication that their pursuit had been unsuccessful. "We should get some rest," Owen suggested, turning away from the window. "It's been a long few days." The hotel had only 2 rooms available, side by side on the second floor. After ensuring Catherine was comfortably settled, Owen retired to his own room, both of them grateful for the luxury of proper beds after nights on the trail. Despite her exhaustion, Catherine found sleep elusive, her mind too full of possibilities and uncertainties. The money Thomas had left her represented freedom and opportunity, but where should she go? What should she do? And most pressingly, what role did she want Owen Taylor to play in whatever future she chose in the adjacent room? Owen was having similar thoughts. The past week had changed everything for him. What had begun as a simple act of human decency, freeing a woman from captivity, had somehow evolved into something far more complex. Catherine Foster had awakened feelings in him he had thought long buried, dreams he had set aside in favor of the solitary life he had grown accustomed to. Now, with Blackwell's gang headed north and the immediate danger past, he faced a choice. Continue on his solitary path, or take a risk on the connection that had formed between them in such a short time. Morning brought no clear answers, but it did bring news. As Owen and Catherine breakfasted in the hotel's small dining room, the deputy they had met the previous day entered, making his way directly to their table. "Mr. Taylor, Miss Foster," he greeted them, removing his hat. "Thought you should know the Army patrol brought back a prisoner last night." One of Blackwell's men separated from the others during the chase. Catherine's hand froze halfway to her mouth, her teacup suspended in midair. "Which one?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fellow named Pike," the deputy replied, not noticing the way Catherine blanched at the name. "He's being held at the jail until the marshal arrives to transport him to Cheyenne for trial." After the deputy left, Owen reached across the table to take Catherine's trembling hand. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Catherine nodded, though her face remained pale. "Pike was the one who put the shackles on me," she said quietly. "He laughed when I begged for water." Owen's expression hardened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You don't have to see him," he assured her. "We can leave town today, head for wherever you want to go next." Catherine was silent for a long moment, her internal struggle visible in her eyes. "No," she finally said, straightening her shoulders. "I need to see him. I need him to see that I survived, that what they did to me didn't break me." The determination in her voice left no room for argument. Owen simply nodded, his admiration for her courage evident in his eyes. "Then I'll be right beside you," he promised. The Silver Creek jail was a small, sturdy building with barred windows and a heavy wooden door. The sheriff, a barrel-chested man with a handlebar mustache, looked up from his desk as they entered. "Deputy Briggs mentioned you might be stopping by," he said, rising to his feet. "Miss Foster, I understand you have history with our prisoner." Catherine nodded, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "He and his associates left me to die," she said simply. "I would like to speak with him if that's possible." The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll allow it, but only for a few minutes." "And your friend here stays with you the whole time," he added, glancing at Owen. Pike was in the cell at the back of the jail, a lanky man with a week's growth of beard and a perpetual sneer. He looked up lazily as they approached, recognition dawning in his eyes as he saw Catherine. "Well, well," he drawled, sitting up on his cot. "If it ain't Thomas Foster's pretty sister, thought you'd be buzzard food by now." Owen's hand tightened on his gun belt, but Catherine placed a restraining hand on his arm. "As you can see, I survived," she said, her voice steady despite the hatred burning in her eyes. "No thanks to you and your friends." Pike shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. "Silas said we'd go back for you eventually. Guess he changed his mind." A malicious grin spread across his face. "Or maybe he just forgot. You weren't exactly memorable." Before Owen could react to the insult, Catherine stepped closer to the bars, her posture straight and proud. "I came here to tell you something, Mr. Pike. You and Blackwell and the others, you thought you were dealing out death when you left me in that barn. But instead, you gave me life." Pike's sneer faltered, confusion replacing the malice in his expression. "If you hadn't chained me there, I would never have met the man who saved me," Catherine continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I would never have discovered my own strength. So in a strange way, I should thank you for showing me what true evil looks like, because now I recognize true goodness when I see it." She glanced at Owen as she spoke these last words, and the look that passed between them was filled with a meaning Pike could never comprehend. "You're crazy," Pike muttered, but the swagger had gone out of him, replaced by a sullen defensiveness. "No," Catherine replied calmly. "I'm free, which is more than you'll ever be again." With that, she turned and walked away, her head held high. Owen followed, resisting the urge to look back at the man who had nearly taken from the world the remarkable woman now striding confidently before him. Outside the jail, Catherine finally allowed her composure to crumble, tears streaming down her face as the emotional toll of the confrontation caught up with her. Without hesitation, Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried against his chest. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair, "the bravest person I've ever known." Catherine's tears gradually subsided, but she remained in the circle of Owen's arms, drawing strength from his solid presence. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes were clear and determined despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. "I know what I want to do now," she said, "and where I want to go." Owen raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "Not Silver Creek," Catherine said, glancing around at the mining settlement that had brought her brother such misfortune. "And not back east either. I was thinking Sweetwater Creek." A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "Mrs. Peterson would be pleased to see you again," he observed. "And it's a growing town, could probably use a good dressmaker." "And you?" Catherine asked, her voice softer now. "What will you do?" Owen's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders as he looked down into her eyes. "I hear Henderson's sister has a small ranch near Sweetwater Creek," he said. "Might still be hiring." Hope bloomed in Catherine's chest, warm and bright as the sun now rising higher in the morning sky. "So we'd be in the same town," she said, not quite a question. "Close enough that I could call on you regularly," Owen agreed, his thumbs drawing small circles on her shoulders. "If that would be welcome." Catherine's answer was to rise on tiptoe and press her lips gently to his, a brief, sweet kiss that held the promise of many more to come. When she pulled back, the look of wonder on Owen's face told her everything she needed to know. "I'd say that's very welcome indeed," he murmured, a smile spreading across his features. They left Silver Creek that afternoon, the money from Thomas's hiding place securely stowed in Catherine's saddlebags, along with the few personal items she had recovered from the cabin. As they rode east toward Sweetwater Creek and the future that awaited them there, Catherine couldn't help but reflect on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A little more than 2 weeks ago, she had been chained in darkness, abandoned to die a slow, agonizing death. Now she rode beneath an open sky, beside a man who had not only saved her life but had somehow become essential to it, toward a future bright with possibility. It would be another month before Owen Taylor officially asked Catherine Foster to become his wife, on a crisp autumn evening as they walked along the banks of Sweetwater Creek. By then, Catherine had already established herself in the growing town, renting a small space next to the general store where she offered dressmaking and alteration services to an appreciative clientele. Owen, true to his word, had secured a position at the Henderson sisters' ranch just outside town, where his knowledge of cattle and horses made him an invaluable addition to the operation. 3 nights a week, without fail, he would ride into town to escort Catherine to dinner at the hotel restaurant or simply to sit on Mrs. Peterson's porch and talk, as the sun set over the distant mountains. Their courtship was relatively brief by the standards of the day, but neither felt any need to wait longer. They had faced death and danger together, they had seen the worst in humanity and the best in each other. What more could time reveal that they didn't already know? They were married in the small church in Sweetwater Creek on a bright December morning, with Mrs. Peterson beaming from the front pew and Dr. Harrison standing as Owen's best man. Catherine wore a gown of her own design, ivory silk with delicate embroidery that had taken her weeks of evening work to complete. As they exchanged vows before the assembled townspeople who had come to respect them both, Catherine thought of the moment Owen had carried her from that dark barn into the sunlight. It seemed fitting that he had become the man who would carry her into the light of a new life, a new beginning. After the ceremony, they moved into a small house halfway between town and the ranch where Owen worked, allowing Catherine to continue her dressmaking business while giving Owen a shorter commute to his duties. The arrangement suited them perfectly, combining independence with togetherness in a balance that respected both their needs. In the spring of 1877, nearly a year after their first meeting, News reached Sweetwater Creek that Silas Blackwell had finally been captured after a shootout with federal marshals near the Montana border. Cord and Jasper had been killed in the confrontation, while Blackwell himself was headed for trial in Cheyenne. "They're saying he'll hang for sure," Owen told Catherine as they sat on the porch of their home one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Catherine nodded, her hand resting on the slight swell of her belly where their first child was growing. The news brought her no joy, but a certain sense of closure. "Justice comes eventually," she said quietly, "even in this wild country." Owen covered her hand with his own, his wedding ring catching the last rays of sunlight. "Are you happy, Catherine?" he asked, the directness of the question typical of his straightforward nature. "With this life we're building." Catherine turned to look at him, this man who had found her in darkness and brought her into light, who had shown her through his actions what love truly meant. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered honestly. "You?" The smile that spread across Owen's face was answer enough, but he leaned in to kiss her gently before adding, "I found what I was looking for without even knowing I was searching for it. How could I be anything but happy?" As darkness fell, and the first stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky, Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that sometimes the darkest moments of life could lead to the brightest beginnings. From the horror of that barn, through danger and uncertainty, she had found not just survival but joy, not just escape but love. And as their child grew within her, Catherine knew that the light Owen had carried her into that day would continue to shine, illuminating not just their lives but the lives of generations to come, a legacy born from courage, compassion, and the unexpected miracle of finding hope in the darkest of places.